I was 32 years old when I discovered that my favorite uncle had been raping my mother since she was 10. But that revelation was still months away. Back then, all I knew was that my mother, Gertrude, had rules that didn't make sense and wounds that wouldn't heal. Rule number 1, hugs lasted exactly 3 seconds. I discovered this peculiar limitation when I was 7, timing her embraces with the focused precision only a child possesses. 3 seconds, exactly 3, and then her hands would gently but firmly pry me away, her smile apologetic but unyielding. "That's enough, sweetheart," she'd whisper, as if love itself had an expiration date. Gertrude, everyone called her Gertie, was the kind of mother other mothers envied. She packed perfect lunches with notes folded into origami cranes. She never missed a school event, never forgot a permission slip, never raised her voice. Her house was immaculate, her garden award-winning, her apple pie legendary at church bake sales. But perfection, I learned, is often just trauma wearing a beautiful mask. The signs were scattered like breadcrumbs I was too young to follow. How she startled when touched unexpectedly, her whole body going rigid as if bracing for impact. How she avoided mirrors in dim lighting, turning away from her own reflection like she was ashamed of what she might see. How she'd never sleep deeply, always half awake, listening for footsteps that might be coming for her again. And God, how she hated holidays. Christmas was a battlefield disguised as a celebration. While other families burst with joy and chaos, our house felt like a beautiful tomb, decorated, cold, untouchable. She'd go through the motions with mechanical precision, the tree, the gifts, the turkey. But her eyes held a terror that no amount of tinsel could hide. "Why don't you like Christmas, Mom?" I asked once, age 12 and bold with curiosity. She froze, a plate halfway to the dishwasher, and for a moment her mask slipped. I saw something raw and hunted flash across her face, the look of prey that knows the predator is coming. "I just prefer quiet celebrations, honey. Now go do your homework." The night everything changed started like any other. I'd crept downstairs for water when I heard the soft, broken sounds coming from the dark hallway. She stood there in her nightgown, holding an old letter with hands that shook like autumn leaves, tears streaming down her face in the moonlight. "Mom," I whispered. She spun around, quickly hiding the letter behind her back like a guilty child. "Oh, sweetheart, you scared me. Just missing Grandma tonight." But Grandma had been dead for 3 years, and I'd never seen Mom cry for her, not once. Something was buried deep in my mother's past, something so terrible she'd rather die than let it see daylight. What I did next would unearth a family secret that had been poisoning us for 40 years. 3 days later, Mom left for her sister's house, a rare occurrence that left me alone with my curiosity and a question that wouldn't stop gnawing at me. What was in that letter? I'd always wondered about the wooden box she kept hidden in the back of her closet, behind old winter coats and forgotten shoes. No lock secured it, just a simple latch that seemed to whisper secrets every time I passed her room. "Just photo albums," I told myself as I pulled it from its hiding place. "Just childhood pictures for that family tree project." The box opened with a soft creak, releasing the scent of old paper and dying lavender. Inside, beneath layers of tissue paper yellow with age, I found fragments of a life I'd never known my mother had lived. Pressed flowers, ticket stubs from movies in the 1970s, and at the bottom, wrapped in faded silk. A leather journal with my mother's name embossed in gold on the cover. My hands trembled as I opened it. The handwriting was young, uncertain, the careful script of a 13-year-old girl trying so hard to be perfect, even in her diary. "Dear Diary, today Uncle Rick came to visit again. He brought me chocolates and said I was getting so pretty, prettier than any of my cousins. Mom and Dad think he's so wonderful because he helps with the bills when Dad's work is slow. But when they go to bed, he comes to my room and The words blurred as my blood turned to ice water. Page after page, the entries continued. A child's voice describing things no child should ever know existed. Uncle Rick, my Uncle Rick, with his kind smile and generous gifts, who everyone loved and trusted and called a godsend to this family. Uncle Rick, who came to her room when the house was dark and quiet. Uncle Rick, who told her it was their special secret and that no one would believe her if she told. He says if I tell anyone, Dad will lose his job and it will be my fault when we lose the house. He says I'm the only one who can help the family this way. He says I should feel special that he chose me. The entries grew more desperate, more broken, until they stopped abruptly on December 23, 1975. I told Mom today I couldn't keep the secret anymore because I think I might be pregnant and I'm so scared. She slapped me hard across the face and said I was a wicked, lying girl for making up such horrible stories about Uncle Rick. She said if Dad finds out what I'm claiming, it will kill him. Dad won't even look at me now. I want to disappear from this world. Maybe if I'm gone, they'll finally understand what they've done. Maybe then they'll believe me. This might be my last entry. I can't keep living like this. Tomorrow is Christmas Eve and he's coming for dinner and I just can't. The page was torn, jagged, as if ripped out in desperation. The rest was gone. My perfect Uncle Rick from all the family stories. The one who'd supposedly helped my grandparents through hard times, who everyone still spoke of with such fondness, who was beloved by children and adults alike. The one who was coming to our Christmas dinner next week. My hands shook so violently I could barely hold the journal. My mother, at 13, had tried to speak her truth and been destroyed by the very people who should have protected her. She'd buried that little girl so deep that even I, her own daughter, had never glimpsed her. But now I understood why Christmas felt like a funeral in our house. What I discovered at the bottom of that box would make me realize the monster had been sitting at our dinner table my entire life. You invited Uncle Rick? The words scraped out of my throat like broken glass. Mom looked up from the turkey she was basting, her face a mask of careful composure. It's his first Christmas since Aunt Helen died. Family should be together during the holidays. She didn't know I'd read the journal. Didn't know I could barely look at her without my heart shattering for the little girl she'd been. The child who'd been violated and then silenced by her own parents. For 4 days, I'd carried her secret like acid in my chest, watching her move through our house like a ghost preparing for her own haunting. Mom, maybe we could just have Christmas here. Just us. Quiet, like you prefer. Don't be silly, Sarah. Your grandparents are expecting us. Everyone will be there. Everyone, including the man who'd stolen her childhood and convinced an entire family that a 13-year-old rape victim was a liar seeking attention. The drive to Grandma and Grandpa's house felt like a death march. Mom sat rigid in the passenger seat, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone bone white. She'd applied her makeup with extra care that morning, but I could see the cracks in her foundation, literally and figuratively. Mom, I said quietly as we pulled into the driveway, you don't have to do this. She turned to me with eyes that held 40 years of buried pain. Yes, I do. If I keep running from him, I'll never stop running. The house buzzed with the warm chaos of family Christmas. Cousins chased each other through the halls. Aunts gossiped in the kitchen. Uncles argued about football in front of the TV. The smell of ham and cinnamon filled the air, along with laughter and the sound of wrapping paper being torn apart by eager children. And there, holding court in the living room like some beloved patriarch, sat Uncle Rick. He was 73 now, silver-haired and grandfatherly, wearing a red sweater that made him look like a department store Santa. He was regaling a circle of relatives with stories that had them all laughing, his pocket full of candy for the kids, his wallet full of 20s for the teenagers. A pillar of the community, a family treasure. Everyone's favorite uncle, a monster wearing a Christmas smile. I watched my mother's face as we entered the room, watched her carefully constructed mask slip for just a moment, revealing the terrified 13-year-old still trapped inside her 30-year-old body. Her breathing became shallow, rapid. Her skin went pale as winter. Then the mask snapped back into place, and she became Gertie again. Perfect, polite, untouchable Gertie. Well, if it isn't my two favorite girls! Uncle Rick's voice boomed across the room like thunder. He rose from his chair with arms outstretched, moving toward us like a predator who'd spotted wounded prey returning to his territory. "Come, give your old uncle a hug!" Mom stood frozen as he approached, that same rigid posture I'd grown up thinking was just her way. But now, I saw it for what it really was. A body braced for violation. A woman disappearing inside herself for protection. "You look absolutely wonderful, Gertie." His hands lingered on her shoulders as he embraced her, and I saw her jaw clench. "Just as beautiful as ever. Time has been very kind to you." She endured it with the practiced grace of someone who'd been enduring the unendurable for decades. Dinner was a carefully orchestrated performance. Mom played her part flawlessly. The dutiful niece, the perfect daughter, the woman who'd never been harmed. She asked about his health, complimented his stories, even managed to laugh at his jokes with a sound like breaking glass. But I saw everything now. The tremor in her hands when she reached for her water glass. How she couldn't quite meet his eyes. How she'd positioned herself as far from him as possible while still maintaining the illusion of family harmony. How she cut her food into tiny pieces but barely ate anything. How Uncle Rick's eyes followed her every movement, like he was reliving private memories. Then came the toast that changed everything. Grandpa stood on unsteady legs, raising his wine glass with hands that shook from more than just age. "To family," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "To the people who love us unconditionally. To Uncle Rick, who's been like a father to so many of us when times were hard. We're blessed to have him." Everyone raised their glasses. Uncle Rick beamed, basking in the praise like a lizard in the sun, his chest puffed with pride. Mom lifted her glass, but her hand was steady now with some internal resolve I didn't recognize. She stood slowly, and the room fell quiet, all eyes on the woman who rarely spoke at these gatherings. "To Uncle Rick," she began, her voice clear and deadly calm, "and to all the children whose lives he's touched over the years." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Uncle Rick's smile flickered like a candle in wind. Mom set down her glass without drinking. The crystal hit the table with a sound like a gunshot. "I have a question for everyone here." Her voice carried a new quality. Not the gentle, measured tone I'd grown up with, but something sharper, more dangerous. Something that had been sleeping for 40 years and was finally, terrifyingly awake. "Has anyone ever wondered why I disappeared from this family when I was 14? Why I never came to Christmas dinners, birthday parties, graduations? Why I kept my distance for so many years that you barely know your own daughter?" The silence was deafening. Uncle Rick's face had gone ashen. "Gertie!" Grandma's voice was sharp with warning and fear. "This isn't the time or place." "When is the time, Mom?" My mother's composure cracked like an eggshell, and 40 years of rage came pouring out. "When is it time to talk about what Uncle Rick did to me in my own bedroom when I was 13 years old? When is it time to acknowledge that I told you the truth and you called me a lying whore?" The room exploded into chaos. Gasps, denials, shocked exclamations. A wineglass shattered against the floor. Someone's child started crying. Uncle Rick stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor like nails on a chalkboard. "This is absolutely ridiculous," he sputtered, but his voice cracked like a teenage boy's. "Gertie, you were always such an imaginative child, such a dramatic—" "I was a child!" she screamed, and the sound cut through the noise like a blade through flesh. I was your niece. I was 10 years old when you first came to my room. 10. She looked around the room at all these people she'd once loved, who'd claimed to love her, who'd failed her when she needed them most. I told you he was raping me, and you made me apologize to him. I told you I was pregnant, and you called me a liar until the pregnancy test proved I wasn't lying. Then you drove me 3 hours away to get rid of the evidence and told me never to speak of it again. The room had gone dead silent except for the sound of people breathing and Uncle Rick's face turning the color of spoiled milk. I named my daughter Sarah because it means princess, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow filled the entire space. Because I wanted her to grow up feeling like royalty, protected and cherished and believed. Because I never wanted her to know what it feels like to be thrown away by the people who should love you most. She turned and walked toward the door, then stopped and looked back at Uncle Rick, who was now trembling in his chair like the old, pathetic man he'd always been underneath the mask. I hope it was worth it, she said. I hope destroying a child was worth 40 years of being treated like a hero. Then she walked out, leaving behind a room full of people who were finally, after 4 decades, being forced to confront the truth they'd chosen to bury. What happened next would split our family into pieces that could never be put back together. I found her sitting in our car, sobbing harder than I'd ever seen anyone cry in my life. How long have you known? Her voice was raw, broken, stripped of every pretense she'd ever worn. I found your diary, I whispered. I'm sorry. I was looking for pictures and I found the wooden box and... Don't you dare apologize. She turned to face me, and for the first time in my 32 years, I saw my mother without any armor, broken, raw, bleeding, human. I should have told you years ago. I've spent so long trying to protect you from my darkness that I forgot you might need to understand it. The parking lot was empty except for us, snow beginning to fall in fat, lazy flakes that stuck to the windshield like tears. Inside that warm house, our family was probably having the most difficult conversation of their lives. Out here, my mother was finally having hers. It started when I was 10, she said, staring straight ahead into the falling snow. Little things at first, hugs that lasted too long, comments about how I was developing so nicely, gifts that were too expensive, too personal. Then one night when Mom and Dad were at a church meeting, he came to my room and said he needed to check something. My heart felt like it was being crushed in someone's fist. The first time he raped me, I thought I was having a nightmare. I kept thinking I'd wake up and it would be over, but it kept happening. Every time he visited, every family gathering, every time my parents needed his help with money. Her laugh was bitter as winter wind. I tried to tell them so many times, tried to find the right words, the right moment. When I finally got brave enough to speak up, Mom said I was being wicked and ungrateful. Dad wouldn't speak to me for weeks. They sent me to confession, made me apologize to God for bearing false witness against a good man. But you were telling the truth. Truth doesn't matter when it's inconvenient for people who need money. Her voice was flat, dead. Uncle Rick was covering Dad's medical bills that year. He was paying for Tommy's college tuition. He was the family savior, and I was just a troubled teenager trying to destroy a good man's reputation. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, a gesture so unlike her usual composed self that it shattered something inside my chest. I got pregnant when I was 14. The words hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. What? Christmas Eve, 1975. That's why the diary entries stopped so suddenly. I was planning to kill myself that night. I had pills saved up, and I was going to take them after everyone went to bed. But then I realized I might be pregnant, and I couldn't take an innocent life just because mine felt worthless. I couldn't breathe. couldn't think. The implications crashed over me like a tsunami. Mom, do I have a— No. Her voice was firm, final. The baby never had a chance to become anything. Grandma took me to a clinic in the city 2 days after Christmas. She said it was the only way to fix the situation and keep the family together. She never said she believed me about Rick, but she believed me enough to drive me 3 hours away and hold my hand while they scraped her grandchild out of me. She couldn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. After that, I left. Stayed with Aunt Margaret until I graduated high school, then moved as far away as I could get. I thought if I just never came back, never talked about it, the pain would stop following me around like a shadow. But it didn't. No, it followed me everywhere. Into every relationship, every job, every moment of happiness I tried to build. And then I had you, and I was so terrified I'd contaminate you with my brokenness. So scared I'd hurt you the way I'd been hurt. So I kept my distance, kept you safe from the poison inside me. Mom! I reached for her hand, and for the first time in my life, she didn't pull away. You didn't keep me safe from your brokenness. You just made me think love had an expiration date. She squeezed my fingers so tight it hurt, and we sat there in the falling snow, 2 women finally telling each other the whole truth. But the hardest truth was still coming. What Mom told me next would make me realize that Uncle Rick's evil had spread far beyond our family. The therapy sessions started 3 weeks after Christmas, but the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. I've never talked to anyone about this, Mom said to Dr. Patricia Chen during our 3rd joint session, her hands twisting in her lap like she was trying to wring courage from her fingers. For 40 years, I convinced myself it was better buried. Trauma doesn't stay buried, Gertrude, Dr. Chen said gently. It just finds other ways to surface. What you experienced wasn't your fault, and your family's reaction wasn't your fault either. I was finally understanding why Mom had never been able to sleep deeply, why sudden touches made her flinch, why she'd armored herself in perfectionism and emotional distance. The little girl who'd been violated and then abandoned by her own parents had grown into a woman who'd learned that love wasn't safe, that closeness meant vulnerability, that the people who should protect you might choose comfortable lies over difficult truths. I spent so many years angry at you, I admitted during one particularly raw session. I thought you didn't want to be close to me. I thought I wasn't worthy of your affection. Mom's face crumpled like paper. Oh, sweetheart, you were perfect. You are perfect. I didn't know how to be close without falling apart completely. The healing was brutal, honest work. Some days, Mom would come home from therapy looking like she'd been hit by a freight train. Other days, she'd seem lighter somehow, like she'd set down a weight she'd been carrying so long, she'd forgotten how heavy it was. She started sleeping better, started letting me hug her for more than 3 seconds, started looking at herself in mirrors without flinching away from her own reflection. And she started getting angry, really, genuinely, righteously angry, for the first time in decades. I should have fought harder, she said one evening, as we sat in our living room sharing a pot of chamomile tea and the kind of honest conversation we'd never been able to have before. I should have kept telling them the truth until anyone, listened. You were a child, Mom. It wasn't your job to make adults do the right thing. But so many other kids. If I'd fought harder, if I'd found a way to make them believe me, maybe he wouldn't have had access to other children all these years. It was a guilt that ate at her, the possibility that her silence had enabled more harm, that somewhere out there, other children had suffered because she hadn't been strong enough to stop him. Dr. Chen helped her understand that this, too, was part of the trap, making victims responsible for their abusers' continued actions, as if a traumatized child could have single-handedly stopped a predator that an entire family had chosen to protect and enable. 3 months into therapy, Mom made a decision that surprised me. "I want to report him," she said quietly. "I know it's been 40 years, and I know nothing will probably come of it, but I need to try. I need there to be an official record, somewhere, that someone finally believed me." We spent 2 weeks working up the courage to call the police. Mom wrote out her statement a dozen times, trying to get every detail right, every date and time and location burned into official record. The detective who took her statement was kind but honest. After 4 decades, with no physical evidence and no witnesses, criminal charges were unlikely. But he took her report seriously, filed it officially, and promised to contact us if any other reports came in about Uncle Rick. 2 days later, my phone rang at 6 a.m. "Sarah?" The voice was shaky, nervous. "This is Jenny Patterson. Well, Jenny Morrison now. I'm Uncle Rick's granddaughter. I got your number from Detective Williams. He said your mom made a report about my grandfather." My blood turned to ice. "Jenny, I need to tell you something. About what your mom said at Christmas dinner? About what Grandpa Rick did to her." Her voice broke. "It happened to me too, when I was 12, and I think there might be others." That phone call opened a door that revealed horrors none of us were prepared for. Jenny wasn't the only one. Once Mom's truth was out in the open, other voices began to emerge from the shadows, like creatures finally brave enough to leave their hiding places. Hushed phone calls, careful conversations, stories that had been buried for decades. A pattern of abuse that had spanned 2 generations, enabled by a family culture that valued reputation over protection. Detective Williams called it a textbook case of institutional enablement. I called it a fucking nightmare. 3 of Uncle Rick's granddaughters, 2 neighbor girls from the 1980s, a boy from his scout troop, all of them carrying secrets, shame, and scars that matched my mother's. "How did we not see it?" Grandma asked through tears during one particularly brutal phone call. "How did I not protect my own daughter? How did I not protect any of them?" "Because you didn't want to see it," Mom replied, her voice steady but not unkind. "Because it was easier to believe I was lying than to face the fact that someone you trusted, someone you needed financially, had betrayed that trust in the worst possible way." The family was fracturing along predictable lines. Those who could accept the truth, Aunt Margaret, my cousin David, even Grandpa in his final months, rallied around Mom and the other survivors. Those who couldn't, who still needed Uncle Rick to be the hero of their story, continued to paint her as a troublemaker, a woman with an agenda, someone trying to destroy a good man's reputation for attention or money. Uncle Rick himself had vanished completely. The day after Christmas, he'd packed up his Arizona house and moved to God knows where. No forwarding address, no explanation, no attempts to defend himself against the mounting accusations. His silence was more damning than any confession could have been. During one of our evening talks, Mom pulled out a piece of paper I'd never seen before. Expensive stationery, cream-colored with her initials embossed at the top in faded gold. "I wrote this letter 40 years ago," she said, unfolding it with the care you'd use handling butterfly wings. "The night before I was going to end my life. I never sent it because there was no one to send it to. But I kept it all these years, and now I think I finally understand why." The ink had faded to brown. The creases were deep from decades of folding and unfolding. But the words were still clear, written in the careful handwriting of a desperate 14-year-old. "To my daughter, if I ever have one. I don't know if I'll live long enough to meet you, but if I do, I want you to know some things that no one has ever told me. I want you to know that sometimes the people who are supposed to love us hurt us instead, and that's never, ever your fault. I want you to know that telling the truth is the scariest and most important thing you can do. I want you to know that you deserve to be protected and cherished and believed no matter what. Most of all, I want you to know that you should never, ever bury your voice to make other people comfortable. Your truth matters, especially when it's inconvenient for others to hear it. I wish someone had told me these things when I was little. I wish someone had fought for me the way I promised to fight for you. If you're reading this, it means I found a way to keep living. It means I found a way to become the mother I needed when I was young. All my love, the girl who will become your mom. I couldn't speak through my tears. This letter, written by a suicidal 14-year-old who thought she had no future, had somehow found its way to me 35 years later. A message in a bottle cast into the ocean of time by a child who dared to hope she might someday matter to someone. "You did it, Mom," I whispered. "You became exactly the mother you promised to be." She smiled through her own tears. "I had a good teacher." "Who?" "That scared little girl who wrote this letter. She taught me that survival is just the beginning. The real work is learning how to live." That night, Mom called Dr. Chen and asked about leading a support group for adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. 6 weeks later, she was standing in front of 23 women and men in a community center conference room, sharing her story publicly for the first time. "My name is Gertrude," she began, her voice strong and clear as a bell. "And I'm here because I finally learned that my truth has value, even when other people don't want to hear it. Especially then." The applause that followed wasn't just for her courage. It was for all of them, for every survivor who'd found the strength to break their silence and step into the light. What happened next would transform my mother from a victim into something powerful beyond imagination. "I want to name her Gertrude." My husband looked at me like I'd suggested, naming our daughter after a serial killer. "Honey, that's a really old-fashioned name. Kids will make fun of her." "It's my mother's name," I said, my hand resting on my swollen belly where our daughter was doing somersaults. "And it means spear of strength. She'll grow up knowing she comes from a line of warriors." We were sitting in the hospital room, waiting for labor to progress, and all I could think about was that letter Mom had written to her future daughter. The terrified 14-year-old who'd somehow found the courage to keep living, to keep hoping, to eventually break her silence and help others break theirs. "Gertrude Sarah," I said finally. "We'll call her Gertie Sarah, a bridge between the woman who survived and the woman who learned to thrive." When our daughter was born 6 hours later, Mom was the first person to hold her after me. I watched my mother, this woman who'd spent 40 years afraid of her own shadow, cradle her granddaughter with tears of pure joy streaming down her face. "Hello, little warrior," she whispered. "I'm your Grandma Gertie. I have so many things to tell you about being brave." The baby opened her eyes as if she recognized the voice, and I swear to God she smiled. Mom looked up at me, her face radiant with a kind of peace I'd never seen before. "For the first time in my life," she said, "I feel like I'm truly living as the mother I was meant to be." 6 months later, Mom's memoir hit the bestseller list. The Voice I Buried, From Victim to Survivor to Warrior. She donated every penny of the proceeds to organizations that support child abuse survivors, keeping only enough to cover the costs of her speaking engagements. Because that's what she became, a speaker, an advocate, a voice for the voiceless. She traveled across the country, sharing her story at conferences, schools, churches, anywhere people needed to hear that survival was possible, that healing was real, that silence was not the answer. The last chapter of her book was titled "A Letter to My Granddaughter," and it began, "Dearest Gertie Sarah, your great-grandmother once told me that children should be seen and not heard. I'm writing to tell you the opposite. You should be heard, believed, celebrated, and lifted up for every word you speak. Your voice is not a burden to be hidden. It's a weapon against darkness, a light for others lost in silence, a bridge between what was and what could be. You come from a long line of women who learned to survive impossible things. But more than that, you come from women who learned that surviving isn't enough. We must also learn to live, to love, to fight for others who cannot yet fight for themselves. I read that final chapter at Mom's book launch, standing at the podium while she sat in the front row with baby Gertie sleeping peacefully in her arms. The audience, full of survivors, supporters, and people hungry for stories of genuine redemption, listened in absolute silence. When I finished, the standing ovation lasted for 5 full minutes. But what mattered most was the look on my mother's face: proud, peaceful, complete, unbroken, unashamed, triumphant. After 40 years of hiding, Gertrude had finally stepped into the light and discovered she was blinding.